our stream. Is this? I hope I didn't start the Sunday service stream. Well, oh well. We're continuing with John's Gospel. I think last time we finished chapter 1. Am I right? Or did we get into chapter 2?
Somewhere. Have we been in 4?
We okay. Let me look very quickly. I think we covered all of chapter 1 because we did Philip and Nathaniel last time. We finished with them, and we're jumping into John 2. So before we start, do we have any specific prayer requests? So we're jumping back in, and as I mentioned, um, when you look at John's gospel, there are a couple of um, different trains that you kind of have to follow as we look at the gospel. One is, how many miracles has Jesus performed? Because John's gospel is structured in that there are either 7 or 8 major miracles. It's not precise. It's if it's 8, the 8th is obviously Jesus rising from the dead, and that fits because when we looked at the prologue, what book does John look back to? You know, in the beginning was the Word. That goes back to Genesis. So obviously, if he's playing with the idea of 7 days of creation, um, anytime day is mentioned, that's hugely significant. Anytime that light and darkness are mentioned, that's hugely significant. And John's gospel, there is also a lot of symbolism in Jesus's teaching regarding mundane earthly elements. It's, you know, if you think of the other gospels, Jesus tells parables, and those are stories that are like, you know, there was a king, right? And the king is supposed to be the father, and the king sent his son out, you know, and it has to be interpreted, but it's dealing with an earthly set of characters that are telling a heavenly story. The teaching in John's gospel really deals with earthly elements that are part of creation, but he uses them in a similar way to point to what he came into this world to do. So it's a very, you know, if you could put a word to it, John's gospel is very incarnational. You know, it deals with this idea of Jesus, the Son of God, the eternal Word, becoming flesh, becoming like us. So we're coming to why I mention all that. We're on the third day, right? So keep that in mind. You know, John is very careful. He doesn't count the days out specifically all the time, but he'll say on the next day and the next day, even though the events might have taken place, you know, months apart, it's the next day as far as the story's concerned, because he's not telling the same gospel that the other disciples wrote. He's filling in details that were previously unknown to the church. Um, so we're on the third day. He's about to perform his first miracle, a major miracle. So, and we'll talk about that. So, can we read 2 to 12? Chapter 2, verse 1 through 12.
On the third day, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now there were 6 stone water jars there for the Jewish rite of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast." So they took it. When the master of the feast tasted the water now became wine, he did not know where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. The master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serve the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now." This is the first of his signs Jesus did at Cana in Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and his brothers and his disciples, and they stayed there for a few days.
Very, very good. So Leviticus is where we get this idea of pure rules in terms of purification. So I'm going to have you put your thumb in your Bible here, and we're going to just very briefly get a small taste. I don't want us to read like 5 chapters of Leviticus just for this part, but let me see if there's I think Leviticus 12 is where we get, yeah. Um, and so if we could just read a little bit, about that here in Leviticus.
Child, then she shall be unclean 7 days. At the time of her menstruation, she shall be unclean. And on the 8th day, the flesh of the foreskin shall be circumcised. Then she shall continue for 33 days in the blood of her purifying. She shall not touch anything holy, nor come into the sanctuary until the days of her purifying are complete. But if she bears a female child, then she shall be unclean 2 weeks, as in her menstruation, and she shall continue in the blood of her purifying for 66 days.
So, these jars for the rites of purification, they weren't there for, just for, this wasn't just an additional tradition, right? This is something that Moses had them write down. This was part of their laws. And notice the purification, a lot of it has to deal with birth, right? Being born. There's different rules for whether you have a son or a daughter as to how long a woman needs to be purified. And notice that, if you have a male, part of the reason is, there's this little rite that men have to go through in the Jewish, in that system called circumcision, right? So the idea of ritual purity, becoming clean with these jars, it's not a small point. This isn't something that was additional, but Jesus is taking them and using them for a new purpose. The message to me is very clear, that you don't need these jars anymore. You're not going to need jars for purification, because a better purification is coming. A better washing than these jars ever have provided will come. And so, the significance of Jesus using these jars specifically and turning them into wine. Now, at first, maybe you think that's kind of gross, but if you think about what they were used for, but they were clean. That's the point. These vessels were clean. They had a designated use for purity. So, Jesus is just at a wedding, at Cana in Galilee, and he says something pretty interesting to his mother, who comes to him, telling them that the wine runs out. He says, first of all, woman, what does this have to do with me? And I'll maintain